up with a guy I met this summer in Charleston who's just so talented and so at ease with public speaking. As many of you know, I do the public speaking thing too and absolutely love it. And I'm sure Corey Poirier gets the same kind of questions that I get. And in fact, he did a book about it. It's this whole thing of how do you do that? And he's written a book called The Book of Public Speaking, Learning to Speak for Purpose, Impact, and Profit. What a killer title. Corey, thanks so much for catching up with us. I know you got a busy schedule.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm absolutely ecstatic to be here.
So let's talk about your road to speaking, to emceeing, to getting up in front of people, to getting hired. How'd that all happen for you?
Kind of a weird, I'm going to say a weird way for it to come together and come to life. I actually got started, and I haven't run into another speaker that followed this same path, so I think it's fairly unique. But I actually got started by having a happy accident and being tricked onto a stand-up comedy stage. And at the very same time, I had a business background. And so I essentially failed on a stand-up comedy stage week after week until I finally discovered the world of speaking. And because I had a business background, it seemed like a nice marriage to sort of marry all the things I liked about comedy and maybe a few of the things I didn't like to maybe get rid of those.
And when you first started off, what were some of the hurdles maybe you had, some of the challenges in the beginning to get where you are?
Well, first and foremost, I was terrified of the idea of speaking on a stage. So my first hurdle, I think, was actually just making peace with the fact that I was going to be doing something that was extremely far outside my comfort zone. And so that was a major hurdle because that was essentially the core of everything I was doing. So, what I was doing was essentially about 1,000 yards outside my comfort zone. So first of all, it was just, I guess, a lot of the, I'm going to call it maybe missteps that I made because I was just so inexperienced, and also in my head, every time I was up speaking, I was thinking about don't do this, don't do that. And so it was, I guess, the biggest hurdle I had was my own emotional, let's say, internal dialogue was probably the biggest. And then, the second part is I thought because I was finally doing what I was scared to do, and I was getting some good reviews from it, I thought that clients were just going to pour in and find me. And that didn't happen either. So those are probably the two biggest, I would say.
All right. I love that you thought the clients were going to pour in and find you. Wouldn't that be great if that happened?
Well, and you get promised that, when you start in speaking, you hear all these other speakers that say, basically all my business is through referrals, and I don't reach out to anybody. I don't talk to anybody. They just call in and say, can we book you this date? And you hear all this stuff, and then you find it hard to find that speaker that actually has that happening.
Exactly. So tell us why you wrote the book. What made you want to write the book?
Biggest reason for me was I got asked the question over and over again. So kind of to this point that we're making, I got asked the question over and over again, how did you launch a speaking career? How can I launch one? How do you get paid to speak? And you seem to be booked a lot, so how are you getting booked so often to speak? So it was those kind of questions I kept getting. And then I started remembering what it was like for me early on and all the missteps I made. And I say trenches I fell down and manholes I fell down. And I said, I don't want other people to have to fall down the same ones I've fallen down if I can point them out to them. Why not have them jump over the manhole or avoid it altogether if I've already fallen down and can show them where it is? So really for me, it was a matter of getting asked the question so often and realizing I could bring something to the conversation and start teaching people all the things that took me 16 years to learn, so that perhaps maybe they could start out on a better foot than me and have a little more guidance than I did when I began. So that's sort of what inspired it.
I love it. You have a quote in your book from one of my friends, Diana Booher, where you say, if you can't write your message in a sentence, you can't say it in an hour. Explain that.
Yeah, so to me, and I'll even go one step further and say, we have a TEDx program where we help people with their TEDx talk, and people always ask me, how long is the training each week? And I say, you know what, it's video training, and I say, it's typically 20 to 30 minutes, because if I can't share it to you in 20 to 30 minutes, how dare I try to teach you how to land and share a TEDx talk in 18 minutes? So, my belief is that a lot of times we basically try to over-explain stuff, and we want to add stuff in so it makes it feel like it's more valuable. But to me, you really should be able to explain it quickly, and you should be able to explain it I'm going to say it in a way that people can understand it very easily in a short amount of time. And if you can't, then you probably can't explain it at all. So to me, that's what that quote means.
I love that. And so tell us about TEDx, because everybody wants to give TED Talks, and TEDx is a great way, if you're lucky enough to get picked, to really nail home what you speak about. And even if you're somebody who's in business or does something else for a living and you still have to speak, it's a great way to get your message out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, in all honesty, I would say it's the biggest game changer. And that's a bold statement, but one of the things that you probably noticed this as well, Kate, is that with books, for example, they used to be the kind of the standard rule, and if you had a book out, you were considered the expert, and bookings came to you and all that kind of stuff. But now it's so easy to have an international best-selling book on Amazon the day after you release the book, and I think most readers know that as well. And so TEDx Talks seem to gain in credibility and gain in prestige, while a lot of other things now have lost a little bit of their luster because it's so much easier to do. So with the TEDx Talk, they know, people watching it, that there's a reason you were selected to be on that stage, and they know that it was more than one person that selected you to be there. So because of that, there's so much prestige there. I have to say, it's opened the doors for me. Each TEDx Talk I delivered opened the doors for me more so than anything else I've ever done. And so it is really a big deal, because if you're a business owner, I mean, you can't talk about your business during your TEDx Talk, but people will seek you out if they really resonate with your talk. At the same time, you can also list your talk all kinds of places and build your own credibility, i.e. your email signature, or anywhere you do your bio, or on social media. You can say TEDx speaker on, and then list your topic, what you spoke on, put your link to your video. And so all of a sudden it opens up doors and gains credibility unlike anything else. But the cool thing is, even if only a small number of people watch your talk, when people hear you've done a TEDx Talk, immediately they say, I have to listen. I have to listen to this person. So, yeah, it's a huge game changer.
Boy, that's a great tip right there. We're speaking with Corey Poirier, and his book is called The Book of Public Speaking, Learning to Speak. And so you said you've done this for 16 years. What's the coolest thing you've ever gotten to do? And I know that's a tough question.
Yeah, that is a tough question, and I'll leave out 3 TEDx Talks, because obviously that would be an easy answer, because we just literally talked about it. So I would say, those are obviously really big moments. But, this is weird because it doesn't relate to speaking at all, but, it's the true answer that comes to me right away, is I actually got to be a volunteer fireman for a day, because a client seen me, a person that went to school, same place as me, who saw one of my talks, and then told me that he worked for this firemen and women, the fireperson training school, and asked if I wanted to go through the process of what a volunteer fireman does. And so he invited me through that process, and I got to live that. So to me, that was a pretty exciting moment. And again, it wasn't speaking at the same time, but it came from speaking.
Wow, very, very cool. What do you hope people take away from your book?
I hope people take away that 2 things. One, speaking is harder than a lot of people think. And, I don't try to scare people out of it, but I want people to realize it's a little harder than people think. And I don't mean just on the stage. I mean building a speaking business. But secondly, I want people to realize that no matter where you start, even if you're the person sweating on the stage that almost falls off the stage, this can still all be learned. I've watched probably more speakers that were terrified on a stage, and talked to more speakers that were terrified when they started, who become amazing speakers, than people that were naturally born to do it. So I hope people can read through that and the book and realize this stuff can all be learned, and I can learn it too. So that would be my hope for a takeaway.
I love that. And see, because you're on these different stages, one thing that happens, and you talked about being a volunteer fireman for a day and what an awesome experience that was, but you also have brushes with fame, because when we travel and you're at different events, a lot of times there are some celebrities that are on hand. And I know you've interviewed a bunch of them. Do you have a favorite one?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and it's a hard one to say a favorite, let's say, interview or person. But I can tell you, and this is still probably a favorite because of this reason, but a very memorable one. And in fact, there's 2 that stand out. But one is a gentleman named Robin Sharma, who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari and 10 other international best-selling books. And I did the interview with him while I had a toothache. And I didn't want to reveal that because I didn't want the interview to be canceled. And so I had to drink water to ease the toothache. But the factor that you don't consider when you're drinking that much water is now I'm going to need to go to the bathroom. And so the whole interview, if you listen to it, you'd never know. So that was kind of a win. But at the same time, I was pretty distracted in my head the whole time during the interview. So it made it very memorable. And then Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul co-creator, it took 4 months to get that interview, and there's a whole backstory as to how what I had to do to actually make that interview come to life and get secured. And so because of those reasons, and both of those gentlemen delivered and knocked it out of the park. Because of those reasons, those would be the most memorable and perhaps along the lines of among my favorites as well.
I absolutely love it. That's cool. Very cool. I love the toothache thing. That had to be something, sitting there with your tooth throbbing. I've only had, luckily, one of those, Corey, but it's horrible. So I don't know how you did that. You just tried to get it out, I guess.
Yeah, it was not easy. I'll say that much.
Brutal. All right, pick up his book. It's The Book of Public Speaking, Learning to Speak. Corey Poirier, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
It was my absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me.